This program was brought to you by Koller Institute of Venture at Tel Aviv University.
My name is David Zvilichovsky. I'm a faculty member here at Tel Aviv University. By profession, I'm both a computer scientist and an economist. I did my PhD here also at Tel Aviv University under Emanuel Trachtenberg, which some of you know. And today I do mostly research, but until 2 years ago, most of my time was spent in the industry. I was an entrepreneur. I did some investments. I was an executive. I lived here. I lived in California. And what I'm going to do in the next 20-something minutes is share with you two of my research topics that have to do with crowds and innovation. Now, typically you look at innovation as something special, unique, one of a kind, bringing something that is different from the past, and you don't always relate it to crowds. The most you go is you relate it to an ecosystem, which means the small crowd of people that are interacting with the creation of innovation. This presentation will try to broaden the perspective a little and show the interaction between crowds in general, crowd, i.e. lots of people, and innovation. Obviously, we'll also get to crowdfunding, which is a new form of interaction between crowds and innovation, but we'll start somewhere totally different. Now, the first paper I'd like to share with you is called Technology Adoption, Bubbles, Network Externalities and Growth. This is a paper I just presented last week at the European Economic Association conference in Gothenburg. And the idea is to interconnect between the financial markets, the existence of bubbles, technology change, and what it does for long-term economic growth. I'll start with sharing some facts, and then I'll give a short description of the high-level view of the research. So the first one is stock market bubbles which are associated with a new technology are not uncommon. We've all lived through the technology bubble of 2000, the internet, and some people think, well, it was a freak, a peculiar happening. If you look at history, you'll see, and I'll share with you some examples, bubbles around technological change and innovation are quite a common phenomenon. The next piece in the information distribution is that stock market bubbles impact much more than the stock market. Okay? Most often when you look at a bubble in the stock market, you look at the price of shares, you talk about the damage that has been done to all those people that have lost the money. We talk about sometimes changes in legislation that came or enabled the bubble and maybe came after the bubble to try to correct the situation. But most often you don't look at the wider impact of a bubble, and we'll try to look at that. And another point of interest is that many stock market bubbles around technology change focused on networking industries. Okay, internet is one of them, but I have to move. Internet is one of them, but another is, for example, railway and trains, and network technology, and we'll see some examples from the UK of the mid-19th century where there was a big bubble around the shares of railway companies. These are some examples, by way of sharing information, of bubbles from the 18th century to today that were associated with technology change and new technology. So we see a cluster around the end of the 18th century around canals. Okay, canals is also a networking technology. We see a cluster around railroads in Britain and then France and the US, also a network technology. Obviously, there are others like mining and related industries.
What is the tulip?
Tulip, yeah.
The tulip is before. I started, and the tulip, we can go into much detail about the tulip. There is something that has to do with technology there, but not for today. A common denominator here, in addition to the part of the networking, is a high degree of uncertainty, like you had in the gold mines that were far away, etc. I promised to tell you a bit about the bubble in the UK. So this is 19th century, mid of 19th century in England. This graph here is the share index of railways. Or railway companies or companies installing railways in the UK stock market. And you see that it was very significant. Now, again, another artifact of bubbles is that they are very large and they create real investments. Now, if you look at the right side of this graph, you'll see in percentage the proportion of assets invested via these companies in railway-related actions out of the national GDP in England. Now, this is 10%. So in the peak of the bubble, around 46, 47, okay, action, monetary action, investments, placing railways in the ground was undertaken, and the expenditure was about 10% of the British GDP of the time. So this is a huge impact on the real economy. And many times people say, okay, the bubbles are mostly in the financial sector. Assets go up and assets go down. People made money and lost money. It's just a zero-sum game and the transfer. Actually, in many cases, it's not the case. In many situations, this bubble directs investment to specific regions and specific areas of interest. Now, when these areas of interest are coupled with externalities and are coupled with, we call it network externalities, you have a very strong impact. Network externalities are, for example, when the amount of people adopting a technology impacts the payoff or impacts how beneficial the technology would be for everyone else. Okay, a simple one would be like the fax system, where a person with one fax system for himself can't do much with it, but you have many people, then they all create productivity from using this network for everyone. So that's an externality. Obviously, the internet is full of externalities, or one railway connecting to another is another example of externality. So this was what happened in the UK 18th century bubble. Another interesting point to note is that most of this money actually went into the ground in installing railways. This line with the triangles is the share index, and this blue line with the circles is a count of the amount of rails opened or inaugurated every year. So what we see is, first of all, a very strong impact, and we see an impact that happens after the bubble. So if you're looking at the bubble and you're here in 46, you say, all this money has gone into these failing companies and they haven't done anything with it. Well, if you look at this, you see that they have done a lot with it, and it has a very strong impact on the economy. For example, by 1850, you had 6,000 miles of track in operation in the UK, and that was about almost 7 times the track density of any other country in the world. So the bubble had a strong impact, way over what you look at the stock market, where people some made money, some lost money, and money was transferred from pocket to pocket. And the interesting thing about it is this huge, huge accomplishment was all done through private investments. Okay? No government investments. You had to go to Parliament then to get an act to establish a company, because that was the law. But apart from that, all private. Obviously, there were other results from the bubble. The ones that are usually quoted are the sharp decline in prices, the bank crisis, a few changes in legislation, and lots of people losing money. But in addition to the impact that I just showed you about the rail lines being opened, you had other positive impacts. You had adoption of standard time across Britain. Until railways were deployed, certain areas in Britain were half an hour different in their time zone from other areas, as late as this 19th century, middle 19th century. But when you need to have a rail connected, and they have to have central, some sort of calendar so people can understand where they're going and when, you had to unify time. Modern steel technology, which later supported modern shipbuilding, came about because of the influx of money into the railway sector and all the research that came with it. And modern management and scheduling practices were, moved ahead significantly.
Plus, very importantly, the investment created standardized width of the lines.
That's true.
Right?
Not initially, but eventually.
Not initially, but eventually, which in turn created faster connections, etc.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the UK chose the wrong ones.
Actually, the US chose the wrong ones.
Well, that's a matter of opinion, right? Depends on which side of the ocean you are. Okay, now I started with the NASDAQ bubble, and I'm going back to this piece of information. What you see here is this line here is the NASDAQ. Well, sorry, this line here is the NASDAQ share index. Again, you see a sharp rise and then a decline around 2000. Now, the darker line represents productivity. Okay, one measure is total factor productivity, or in this case, non-farm productivity. So what you see here is that there is a huge change in productivity following the bubble. Okay? You would think that when investments crash, productivity should go down. But here you see that after the investments have gone down, productivity goes up. And it has gone up in a very significant fashion. If you look at this table here, you see that long-term averages are about 2.28. Prior to the bubble, we have a less than 2% era. During the bubble, we have a 2.7, and post-bubble, we go over 3. So the bubble had a very strong impact on the different productivity measures, in this case in the US.
What are the units of the three?
Annual, productivity is annual change per year.
Okay.
Year over year,
3%.
3% a year.
Okay.
Year over year, and if here it's for these 4 or 5 years, every year 3 something.
The annual change.
In here it's labor productivity, and here is total factor productivity, which is a different measure, but you see the scale and the references are the same. 1.8 is very significant compared to this half a percentage a year annually. Okay, so I hope I persuaded you that first of all, bubbles related to technology and especially networking technology exist. I hope I persuaded you that the impact is significant and that most of this impact comes after the bubble has gone. And this is what we research. As I promised, I'm going to give you a very short excerpt of 2 papers. So this is one of them. And it focuses on the price of assets that are associated with companies in this technology space, and also the outcomes. And specifically, we talk about the co-interaction between the positive network externalities that I mentioned and this bubbly process. Okay. What we show is in the presence of networking technologies, the bubble is amplified, meaning that it's much larger, and it crashes with a bigger bang, both up and down. But also, the bubble itself may have a positive impact on the outcome. Okay? Because in network externality literature, and I think also if you apply common logic, when you have network externalities, by definition, market equilibria is suboptimal. Why is that? Because people cannot internalize the externality their decision exerts. So by definition, in all situations where there are externalities, both standard and network externalities, the market equilibria is suboptimal. And if you go back to the NASDAQ example, think of how many things had to be aligned for us to have what we have today in our pocket. Okay? We would have the users that would have to decide that they're buying the end user devices. We would have to have the developers deciding to develop the applications. The infrastructure companies would have to put the infrastructure in the ground. All this has to come together, and if it does, it's a big bang, but if it doesn't, you stay in a very low equilibrium. So I argue, and this research shows, that the bubble serves as a coordination mechanism that moves us to a higher equilibrium and facilitates huge leaps in productivity or in other positive aspects, as we've seen, like in the railway examples. So bubbles can have an important role. Now what we do is, in the paper, we compare a path that has full certainty, meaning I know exactly what's going to happen, which is sometimes considered good by economists, and because by definition uncertainty is bad. If you have a standard utility curve, you're under the curve, so you have a lower utility. And we compare the baseline, which is adoption under a known growth impact of the technology, to a different one where uncertainty is introduced. And what we find is that the uncertainty itself can create the bubble, even if expectations are fully rational. Okay? You don't have to be over-optimistic. You can be fully rational in the sense that you don't know exactly what's going to happen. There's a lot of noise, and that is enough to generate a bubble. And if it's around networking technologies, it may have a very strong long-term impact on growth. So that's what I already said. Okay. Now, this is a very striking perspective because uncertainty improves growth and welfare. And under certain regions of uncertainty, growth and welfare increase as uncertainty increases, which is a point to think about. Now, I'll skip that simulation, just this one. The dotted line is the growth under certainty benchmark. The horizontal plane here is some measure of uncertainty. So you see that for this type of scenario where there are network externalities, of course, initially, uncertainty just creates some marginal damage in this perspective, but there is a robust range of support, what we call, that provides a growth rate which is much higher than that which would have been achieved under full certainty. And this may have interesting policy implications, because any research into ventures also has a policy recommendation agenda. This may have interesting policy recommendations as to what you should do when you see such a thing. You're a policymaker sitting somewhere in Washington or Bernanke at the place, or someone in 1929 to make a change, and you want to curb this bubble or let it take a ride, at least partial ride. Now, if the bubble is about assets like real estate, most people would agree that most of the time its impact is mostly bad. But if the bubble incorporates technologies such as the ones that we've discussed, maybe having a laissez-faire approach, and letting the markets ride a little would improve everyone's position in the long end, and it's always mostly with private money.
By the way, the property bubble has created fantastic buildings where...
That's true. That's true. Okay, so that was the first part of the presentation. Okay, so since Yesha hinted that you might be getting a little tired, I just want you to look at the short film. This is just to wake you up, and I'll have a question soon. Okay, so that was a nice...
What happens in the end?
I'll show you what happens in the end from our perspective, and I'll come back to this. This was a proposal for developing a game. As you've seen, a very visual game, a crowd-oriented game, meaning that people will play this, take on roles, and play this. Now, this game doesn't exist yet. This is a game that the creator of the game wants to fund. Okay? Now, assuming we were sitting on the board of a VC fund, we would be presented with this very striking and nice illustration of graphics. But then we want to discuss these points that they made in the opening. Like, this is a PC game, right? It's not a console game or a cell phone game, which is today considered the bon ton. This is where the industry is going, okay? And there are many questions that we would ask whether we want to fund this game, because it's actually against part of the current let's say, hotspots of game development. Okay, so what do you think? This game will or will not be? Would you support the development of this game? Well, I'll give you a quick answer. Fortunately for the guys who developed this game, they don't really ask the VC world what to do. They decided that this game is good for crowdfunding. And if the crowds like it, then they don't have to go to a panel of 5 people who have to give their opinion. The crowd will say if they want it or not. And this is the center of this next topic, a few minutes. So first of all, the definition of a crowdfunding. A crowd, in this sense, is a small investments or donations from a very large number of donors, of providers or investors. Funding is to fund projects, and it's done over the internet. Now, first of all, fundraising was successful for this game. Okay? It went and raised $2 million in 32 days back in November of last year, November 2012. So it's a huge success. They had a target of $500,000. 34,000 backers, okay, bought. What did they buy? They bought future pieces of this virtual world. Okay, remember, it's a virtual world that doesn't exist, okay, and you're buying things that won't exist either, but virtual positions in this virtual world a year and something before it comes into life.
That's what we call Luftgeschäft.
Yeah, but this Luftgeschäft has a lot of money into it. Right. You could be a rear admiral for $275 or a scout for $30. And all this, 34,000 people decided it's a good game. So no one had to ask, these people with the special knowledge. It's just the consumers were asked. And this is a very strong attribute of crowdfunding. The idea is that you pre-sell the new product, and then you have both a financing source, and you also have a marketing answer, okay? So crowdfunding is a big thing, and it has been growing significantly. Over the last, in 2012, $2.7 billion were raised for thousands and thousands of projects using crowdfunding. And this forecast is forecasted to grow to $5.1 billion in 2013. So it's a huge industry. Sorry?
Where is this focus from?
I'll get you it's on one of the next graphs. It's a company that deals with data on this industry. So, $2 million is a great success, right? Well, let me show you what's happening with this project now. The owner of the project decided, well, if people like it so much, I can go out of Kickstarter, which is the channel he used for the first crowdfunding, and I'll raise more money. If I raise more money, I can have more participants and expand the world, meaning invest another $1 million and I'll build you one more galaxy and I'll give each one of your jet fighters 3 more bombs with okay, so remember, this was September 12 when he started and raised the 2012. So he extended the target, and by the end of the year, he had 3 million. This is all by people who want to be a rear admiral for $250 in next year's game. So you think that's a lot? Okay, since we're short on time. Currently, I skipped that just a second. You see that he set goals. That's when every goal was reached, right? So I'll go down just to see what the current goal is. Okay? Here we are now. Okay? 31st of August, 2:30, that means 2 days ago. Okay? Less than a year, he achieved the $17 million financing goal.
Engine modifier.
Okay, and what he gave for that goal is all kinds of features like every pledger who backs before 17 will receive a ship upgrade package containing an engine modifier, and Star Citizen will finish additional flyable ship classes and battle cruisers.
Of course.
Okay?
It's the cruisers that makes the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean,
That's what we needed.
but don't kick it. Today he's 62% into the $18 million target, and I think that they will have to decide when they want to stop. The crowd won't stop them. Okay? The game is going to, first of all, it's not developed yet. This is crowdfunding for the innovation, for the R&D. It's going to be released next year in stages. Okay, so this is a massive impact. That's the second. Three.
Is that his real name? Is Chris Roberts
That's his real name, and he has done
It's a
games
real
before.
company.
It's a real company, a real game, and I am sure it's going to be a real success.
We're looking at
Okay?
areas of relation.
So going back to the facts and figures.
How much did you invest?
Sorry?
How much did you invest?
Nothing.
You don't get a
By the way, it's not an investment, it's a pre-buy. Okay?
That's the interesting thing.
And we'll talk about it.
He owns the whole
So
thing.
first of all, 5 minutes? Yes, sir. Yeah, okay.
No. 2 minutes.
And
Bottom
that-
line. Bottom line.
Can't work. So this is just a map of the world. You see that crowdfunding is mostly in the Western world, and US is leading with strong take-up in Europe. The rest of the world is way behind. There are different types of crowdfunding. Donations, which is the classic place where crowdfunding started, meaning that people would put a social cause on the internet and people would donate money. Rewards, which is the largest category, which is the one we talked about. Okay, when you pre-buy, most rewards are buying future products. Some rewards are recognition. Invest $5 and get your name in the list of the people who supported this project. Now rewards, they provide direct market feedback, and they also give the customers a feeling of participation. So there could be situations where customers invest more because it's a future game they invested in, rather than less because it's not developed. Okay? So this is, again, a self-fulfilling positive feedback loop. Crowdfunding is gaining a lot of momentum. More crowdfunding we've seen, more projects, higher sum than legislation. For example, in the US, an act called the Jobs Act was signed a year ago by Obama to enable, wait, I'll get to that, to enable these investments from the public without a prospectus. And the idea is that you circumvent the current industry and you allow for raising of limited sums from certain individuals. In the UK, by the way, it's already possible under certain limitations. And in the UK, you have crowdfunding sites that give equity. In the US today, they only give rewards and pre-sale like we've seen.
AngelList in the US.
Sorry?
There's AngelList.
You have to pre-order.
Yes, but that's a pre-qualification process.
In the UK,
It's moving forward.
Football club.
Uh-huh.
People who wanted to, they were sick of the managerial process. They all invested together and went to bought a club, I think on the 3rd or 4th tier of football, and then they used the web to vote on what players they buy, what strategies they enact as well. So it's really moving across all sectors.
Conclusion.
Okay. Two more facts. This is moving very fast. Just in January 2012, the first crowdfunding project secured more than $1 million. Okay, a year and something ago. In April, it took 28 hours for the next one to secure $1 million. It was the Pebble Watch. In 30-something days, it raised more than $10 million. And the entrepreneurs stopped this because they didn't want more money. Legislation came into place. I want to show you two things to conclude, and I won't go into the end of our research on this. This is the current breakdown of what happens in crowdfunding today. Still, most of the investments are in social causes, but there are significant portions now in real business and entrepreneurship. This is expected to grow significantly. And as an example, this is a crowdfunding project that did not succeed. You know, I don't want you to think that everything succeeds, but it's a real-world R&D project to develop a new smartphone. So a company, in this case in the UK, targeted $32 million as a target for developing this phone. They were unsuccessful. They raised only 12, and the project was shut down because the way you do it is if you don't reach the target, you don't take the money from the people. I'm showing you this for two reasons. One, not all crowdfunding projects succeed. And two, this is really mainstream. Okay, this is not already some, fringe, or not even in the gaming industry. So crowdfunding is here to stay. I'll jump over the research that I will tell you about later and just summarize with this slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This program was brought to you by Koller Institute of Venture at Tel Aviv University.